right, everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're tackling John Carpenter's Halloween, that classic horror flick.
Yeah, Halloween.
We've got a ton of sources to dig into today.
Oh, should be interesting.
Articles about Halloween, a whole biography on Carpenter himself, some background on Donald Pleasance, who played Dr. Loomis, even some general info about the horror genre pulled from Wikipedia.
Okay, cool.
So let's get spooky, shall we? Right off the bat, one of the most fascinating things about Halloween is its budget, or lack thereof.
Yeah, it's pretty wild how much they did with so little.
I mean, they made the entire movie for just $300,000.
Yeah, a shoestring budget for sure.
But it ended up grossing $70 million worldwide.
That's insane.
It's crazy, right? Especially when you consider how critics initially reacted.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading some pretty harsh reviews back then.
Pauline Kael, for example, she pretty much called it dumbed-down horror.
Oh, wow. Yeah, some critics just didn't get it.
It just goes to show you can't always predict a film's success based on initial reactions. But let's talk money for a second.
Okay.
That $70 million back then, if you adjust it for inflation, that's like $267 million today.
Wow, that puts it in perspective. A true horror blockbuster. And it's a movie that really captures the anxieties of its time,
Oh, yeah, totally.
Late 70s, the whole post-Vietnam, post-Watergate era, lots of disillusionment in the air.
Yeah, and that's when the slasher genre really started to explode.
Exactly. All those movies about teenagers and babysitters being terrorized.
People were really tapping into that sense of vulnerability.
Yeah, for sure. It was a reflection of those times.
Speaking of tapping into something, we can't forget the mastermind behind it all, John Carpenter.
Yeah, the man himself.
Did you know this guy's not just a director?
Oh, I know. He's multi-talented.
He composed and co-composed music for a bunch of his films.
Oh, yeah, I didn't realize he did that for so many of them.
And he even won a Saturn Award for Best Music for Vampires.
Oh, wow. That's impressive. I actually really like that score.
Yeah, he's a seriously talented dude.
He really is.
It's like this whole other side to him. And get this, he also co-owns a comic book company, Storm King Comics, with his wife.
Wait, really? I had no idea.
See, the guy's got range.
Yeah.
But let's go back a bit. Before all the horror, there was something else that fascinated Carpenter.
Oh, what's that?
Westerns. As a kid, he was obsessed.
Oh, wow, really? Western.
Howard Hawks, John Ford, all those classic directors.
Yeah, I can see the influence in his work. That sense of atmosphere, the wide open spaces.
It's kind of wild, right? To go from loving Westerns as a kid to creating something like Halloween.
Well, it's interesting because it shows the breadth of his influences, and it's not just Westerns.
Well,
He was also drawn to low-budget horror as a kid, but also big-budget sci-fi.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's like those two seemingly opposite genres foreshadowed the direction his career would take.
That's a really cool way to look at it.
Right. Those early fascinations kind of paved the way for his later work.
Okay, before we get completely sidetracked by Carpenter's awesomeness, we've got to talk about Donald Pleasance.
Oh, yeah, Dr. Loomis.
Here's a fun fact. His portrayal of Blofeld in You Only Live Twice, the Bond villain.
Yeah, the one with the cat.
That performance actually inspired both Dr. Evil from Austin Powers and Dr. Claw from Inspector Gadget.
Wow, I never made that connection. That's amazing.
Talk about an iconic performance, right? But it's easy to get stuck thinking about actors in just one role.
Yeah, for sure. Especially with a character as memorable as Blofeld.
But Pleasance had a crazy, diverse career, like way more than just Bond villains.
Oh, yeah, he was a very accomplished actor.
He actually debuted on television all the way back in 1946.
Wow, so he had a long career in the industry.
And he starred in a BBC adaptation of 1984 alongside Peter Cushing.
Oh, wow, 1984. That's a classic. I didn't realize he was in that.
He was all over the place. Remember Prince John and the Adventures of Robin Hood?
Oh, right. Yeah, I totally forgot he played Prince John.
See? Wild range.
Seriously, he was in everything.
He even did a guest spot on The Twilight Zone.
Wow, that's cool. I need to rewatch that episode now.
And get this, he played Lucifer in The Greatest Story Ever Told.
Oh, man, he really did run the gamut of roles.
And as if that wasn't enough, he also did some American Westerns and even worked with a young George Lucas on THX 1138.
Seriously, I had no idea he worked with George Lucas. That's incredible.
Talk about a well-rounded career.
He definitely wasn't afraid to take on different kinds of roles.
Okay, so we've talked about the movie, the director, even the actors. But let's zoom out for a sec.
Okay.
What about the horror genre itself? What is it about these stories that draws us in?
That's a good question, I think.
What is it about the things that scare us that makes us want to keep watching?
Well, if you look at the Wikipedia definition, it says that horror films basically focus on dark and disturbing subject matter. You know, the stuff that triggers fear, terror, disgust, those kinds of intense reactions.
Yeah, those gut-wrenching feelings.
Exactly. But I think the real common thread in most horror is the idea of the monster as this threat to normalcy.
That's a really interesting point. Like, the monster represents everything that could disrupt our safe little bubbles.
Exactly. That's what makes it so scary.
So it's not just about the monster itself, it's about what it represents.
Right. Like in Halloween, you have Michael Myers, but he's more than just a guy in a mask.
Yeah, he's the boogeyman, the embodiment of pure evil, and the way Carpenter builds tension throughout the film.
Oh, it's masterful. Like that long, slow shot where Laurie's walking home and you keep seeing Michael Myers in the background, out of focus.
Oh my God, yes. It's like you know something bad is going to happen, but you don't know when or how.
That's what I'm talking about. That's Carpenter using the camera to scare the pants off of us.
And then suddenly, Michael Myers is just gone.
Leaving you wondering if he was ever really there or if you imagined it. It's brilliant.
So creepy.
Speaking of creepy, have you noticed how The Thing, another one of Carpenter's films.
Oh yeah, the remake of The Thing from Another World.
Right, that one. The monster in that film could be anyone. Well, that film actually connects to a bigger idea in his work.
Oh, what's that?
It's part of what some people call his Apocalypse trilogy.
Wait, Apocalypse trilogy? What's that all about?
The other two films in this unofficial trilogy are Prince of Darkness and In the Mouth of Madness.
Okay, so what connects these three films? What makes them a trilogy?
Well, they all share this really bleak outlook on the future. Like a deep-seated anxiety about where humanity's headed.
Interesting. That kind of ties back to what we were saying about the late 70s vibe and all that, right?
Exactly. It's like Carpenter's own fears and anxieties about the future bleeding into his work.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. We got to unpack this Apocalypse trilogy a bit more.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, an Apocalypse trilogy, huh? That's pretty intense.
Yeah, it's definitely a theme that runs through a lot of his work.
So we're talking about Carpenter's fears about the future. But how does that actually play out in Halloween?
Well, it's subtle, but it's definitely there.
Okay, like what?
Think about Michael Myers for a second.
Yeah, the masked killer.
He just appears.
Right.
No backstory.
We don't know anything about him.
No real motivation.
He's just evil.
He's pure evil.
Like the embodiment of evil.
It's like this force of nature.
Right. Yeah.
You can't reason with him.
You can't stop him.
There's no logic to it.
And that totally plays into that whole loss of innocence thing.
Exactly.
Like the idea that evil can just erupt anywhere, anytime.
Out of nowhere.
And you can't predict it.
And there's nothing you can do to stop it.
It's terrifying.
And it resonates with people.
Yeah.
Especially in times of uncertainty.
Like when the world feels unpredictable and scary.
Exactly. It's like Carpenter saying, look, the world isn't safe.
Yeah.
The boogeyman is real.
And it could be anyone.
Anyone.
So we've got those themes of fear and anxiety about the future. But then you've also got the way Carpenter actually uses the camera to scare the crap out of you.
Oh, absolutely. He's a master of suspense.
Remember that scene where Laurie's walking home and you keep seeing Michael Myers in the background?
Oh, yeah.
Like he's just out of focus.
Lurking in the shadows.
You don't always get a clear look at him, but you know he's there.
It's brilliant. It's called negative space. He uses it to create this incredible tension.
Yeah, because your brain is like, something's wrong here.
Yeah.
But you can't quite put your finger on it.
Exactly.
And the fear is right there.
In those empty spaces.
And then, just like that, he's gone.
Vanished.
It's almost worse than actually seeing him.
Yeah, because you're left wondering, did I really see that?
Or am I just imagining things?
Is he really there?
Or am I going crazy? It's so effective.
It plays on our primal instincts.
Yeah.
That fear of the unknown, the predator hiding in plain sight.
It's chilling.
And then, of course, there are the jump scares.
Oh my God, the jump scares.
I think everyone jumped out of their seat at least once during Halloween.
The first time I saw it, I practically leaped out of my skin.
But jump scares aren't just about loud noises, you know?
Oh, right.
Carpenter uses them strategically. It's all about the build-up.
The anticipating.
He creates this unbearable tension, and then...
Bam!
Release valve. Shocks you back into that heightened sense of awareness.
It's like your heart skips a beat and then starts racing. And he uses mirrors so effectively, too.
Oh, the mirrors.
Remember when Laurie thinks she's alone? And then she catches Michael Myers' reflection?
It's like he's everywhere.
Even in the places where you should feel safe.
Mirrors become this source of paranoia in Halloween.
They reflect back not just the characters, but our own fears, too.
It's like looking into the abyss.
And seeing something terrifying staring back at you.
And speaking of characters, we can't forget Laurie Strode. She's no damsel in distress.
Oh, absolutely. She's a fighter.
Smart, resourceful, she fights back.
She's not just running and screaming. She's a survivor.
And that's a huge part of why Halloween resonated with audiences, especially women. It tapped into this emerging sense of female empowerment.
Right, like, we're not going to just sit here and take it anymore.
Exactly. Laurie became a symbol of resilience in the face of unimaginable terror.
And Jamie Lee Curtis's performance is just phenomenal.
She really sells it.
You can feel her fear, but also her determination to survive.
No wonder she's considered the ultimate scream queen.
Speaking of scream queens and slasher films, it's interesting how Halloween started with this really simple concept.
Oh yeah, tell me about it.
Remember, it was originally just about babysitters being terrorized by a stalker.
Yeah, I think I read that somewhere.
The working title was even The Babysitter Murders.
The Babysitter Murders. Really, that's a mouthful.
I know, right?
But I can see how that basic idea evolved into something much bigger.
Yeah, it's the perfect slasher setup.
A group of teenagers, isolated, vulnerable.
And then you've got the masked killer.
The bladed weaper.
The suspense building with each victim.
It's a formula that works. But Halloween did something more than just scare you.
Oh, yeah.
It made you think. It tapped into those anxieties about violence, about the loss of innocence, about the dangers lurking in the shadows of suburbia.
Right, like, it's not just some mindless slasher flick. There's depth to it.
Absolutely. And it did it in a way that was both terrifying and thought-provoking.
So we've talked about the film's themes, the technical brilliance, the characters.
Yeah.
But what about its legacy? I mean, it's over 40 years old, and people are still obsessed with it.
It's more than just a movie at this point. It's a cultural phenomenon.
It's like it's woven into the fabric of Halloween itself.
Exactly. It spawned a whole franchise of sequels, remakes, reboots.
And you can't walk down the street on Halloween without seeing that iconic Michael Myers mask.
It's become the symbol of Halloween itself.
But it's more than just a costume, right?
Right.
It represents something deeper.
It taps into our fascination with fear.
Our morbid curiosity about the darkness that lurks beneath the surface of everyday life.
Halloween gave us a name, a face for that fear.
And it showed us that sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't supernatural creatures or ghosts.
Yeah.
They're just people.
People who are capable of unimaginable evil.
And that's a truly terrifying thought. Yeah, it's kind of disturbing when you think about it that way.
Yeah.
The scariest monsters are often the ones that look just like us. But that whole monster as a person thing makes you wonder about the deeper meaning, like why Halloween resonated so strongly back in '78.
Right. There's got to be more to it than just jump scares and creepy masks.
Totally. So if we're talking about those deeper anxieties of the late '70s, what specifically are we talking about?
Well, think about the fear of the outsider. The Vietnam War had just ended. Watergate had shaken everyone up.
Right. A lot of social and political upheaval.
Exactly. And that created this underlying sense of unease. Like a fear of the unknown disrupting that comfortable suburban life.
And then you've got Michael Myers just appearing out of nowhere.
Boom. Pure evil, no explanation, no clear motive.
Just chaos personified.
He's the embodiment of that outsider fear, the boogeyman come to life, shattering that illusion of safety and security.
Makes you think twice about what's lurking behind that white picket fence.
Right. You never know what's hiding beneath the surface. But it's not just about the external threat either.
What else?
There's that whole theme of the loss of innocence, too, especially with all the focus on teenagers and babysitters.
Yeah, you're right. Halloween really captures that transition from childhood to adulthood.
That moment when you realize the world isn't as safe and predictable as you once thought.
It's like Carpenter saying, hey, growing up can be scary, and sometimes the monsters are real.
And that message really resonated with audiences back then, especially as the slasher genre was taking off.
Because these films were tapping into all those anxieties about sexuality, violence, all the stuff that makes people uncomfortable.
Exactly. Halloween both reflects and shapes those anxieties. It gives a face to the fears that were already bubbling under the surface.
It's like a feedback loop of terror. But okay, before we go full-blown existential crisis mode, can we talk about how well-made Halloween is? Like, beyond the psychological stuff, it's a masterpiece of filmmaking.
Oh, absolutely. Carpenter's direction is amazing. The long takes, the slow pacing, that minimalist use of special effects.
Yeah, it creates this incredibly intense atmosphere.
It's all about creating dread and anticipation.
And that score, that haunting piano melody is just iconic.
Pure genius. It's so simple, yet so effective. It gets under your skin and stays there.
You can't hear it without picturing Michael Myers.
And Dean Cundey's cinematography. Don't even get me started.
Oh, yeah, those shadows and light, the framing of the shots.
It's like visual storytelling at its best.
So, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the film's success, those anxieties of the time, Carpenter's insane talent, the lasting impact. But what's the takeaway for our listeners? Why should they care about a horror film that came out over 40 years ago?
Because Halloween is more than just a movie, right? It's a cultural touchstone that still resonates with people today.
It's like this shared experience, a collective nightmare that we keep coming back to.
Exactly. It forces us to confront our fears, to acknowledge that darkness exists in the world, and maybe even within ourselves.
It's a reminder that evil can lurk anywhere, even in the most mundane places.
And that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones we least expect.
Well, there you have it, folks. Another deep dive completed. And as we wrap things up, we want to leave you with this. Think about why we're so drawn to horror.
What is it about the dark and the unknown that fascinates us?
What does it tell us about ourselves, about our fears, about our place in the world? Maybe exploring those questions will lead you to a deeper understanding of not just the horror genre, but the human condition itself.
And hey, if this deep dive has inspired you to revisit Halloween or check out some of John Carpenter's other films, let us know. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, keep it spooky.